Godzilla is one of the most recognizable characters in pop culture history that has transcended the generational gap that his influence still holds strong today after starring in more than 30 films in 6 decades. And it all started in the 1954 Japanese film Gojira, which tells the story of a terrible monster that comes from the depths of the ocean to the shores of Japan in a devastating rampage that left cities in ruins and countless casualties caused by radiation poisoning as a result of non-stop nuclear testing. Since then, subsequent sequels were released that continued with the story, including our versions of the legendary monster. Besides the Roland Emmerich version, I haven't seen any of the Godzilla films from Japan, and I've always thought that it was nothing more than just a regular monster flick. Then, when I saw that the original Japanese version was available on Netflix, I took the opportunity to see it, knowing that the character is still a cinematic icon, so there was a sense of obligation on my part. And I was pleasantly surprised just how poignant it is with its allegory about nuclear destruction. This film was released 9 years after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki of Japan that swiftly brought World War II to its definite end, so the collective memories of those historic events were still fresh in the minds of the Japanese. Immediately afterwards, the Cold War had just begun between the US and the Soviet Union as they began an arms race by building countless of nuclear warheads, each one more powerful than the original atomic bombs that could destroy the world many times over. And it was during this time period where nuclear and hydrogen weapon testing were constant over the Pacific Ocean that it led to an incident where a Japanese fishing boat called Lucky Dragon 5 was caught close to one of those test sites and its crew suffered from radiation sickness, which was the initial inspiration for Godzilla. So this film was made with all of these contexts in mind, and say what you will whether the act was justifiable or not, with Japan being the only country to this day to have suffered heavy casualties as a result of a nuclear attack, they would add a more personal nuance to the story as opposed to any other who would not even consider the concept. Now, while the film can still be seen as nothing more than just a fun and enjoyable monster movie, it does actually addresses the issue of nuclear destruction, with Godzilla representing the atomic bomb that has come to destroy the people that created it. The images of the people suffering from his rampage gives off the feeling of the time period where people were still coming to terms about their history and made the film more humane than I ever imagined it would be. Because of how touched I feel while watching it and figuring out what the film was ultimately about, it separates itself from most other disaster films that refuse to acknowledge the human suffering of the event while promoting a fun and adventurous flick that made me feel like it was insulting my intelligence. So if it weren't for that important theme and the historical context behind it, I probably would have classified it as rather boring and possibly tasteless. Thankfully, I can say for myself that it isn't, and it is exciting enough for me to be engaged with the story. However, I can't really say that for the characters themselves, but the one that I thought is the most memorable, besides the obvious one, is the scientist Daisuke Shizawa, played by Akihiko Hiwata. Besides sporting an eye patch, he created a devastating weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer that could disintegrate oxygen atoms that cause any living organisms to die of asphyxiation and then rot until there is nothing left of them. When this weapon was revealed and suggested to be used against Godzilla to finally kill it, he refuses and even regrets in having invented it in the first place, as it could have deadly consequences on the world if it is revealed. The film certainly has much to say about the creation of weapons of mass destruction and how it all could come back and bite us in the ass if we don't employ caution and foresight of what the future may hold with their existence. But with all that being said, the highlight of the film is without a doubt Godzilla coming in and doing what he does best, causing lots of destruction, and they are entertaining in their own right, even though I can't tell just how fake it all look. But then again, I can pretty much say that for any film that heavily relies on CGI, and sometimes this kind of filmmaking can have its own charm for me, so I think the point is very moot. It can be fascinating to see just how they made this all work and look as good as it does, and even exciting to watch. And as for the big guy himself, because the film is shot in black and white and they mostly have him in shadow, it actually helps as it manages to sell the terrifying and nightmarish nature of it all, and even makes it look realistic as opposed to shooting it in color and having it as bright as they can, as future Godzilla films seems to do. That would just destroy the illusion and even the concept itself. While the original may have lost much of its power over the decades and most likely will be set aside for the ones that rely on the entertainment aspect, it doesn't and it shouldn't take away the impact that it has created that is as visible as a footprint left by Godzilla himself. And because of the humanitarian message that it bravely shows, it actually created an expectation in me for future Godzilla films that I now believe needs to have, especially when we rely so much on nuclear power on a regular and daily basis. The film may not come close for me to call it as one of the greatest movies ever made, as its message would dull for me with future viewings and is not all that compelling unless I'm in the right mood. But I'll continue to give it credit for being more than I ever anticipated, and it gets a lot of respect from me.